I ever mentioned how I love Steve Kerr? Why? Because Steve Kerr can admit when he's wrong, and I love people who can admit when they're wrong. And Steve did that earlier today. All right, we're brought to you by Pig in a Pickle. Check them out, 2 locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week in both locations from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. Pig in a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Try the brisket. Try the brisket chili as well. The brisket chili is absolutely amazing. All right, let's talk more about Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr knew that something was off with last year's Warriors squad. He's a 4-time championship coach, and he admitted that it was his fault. The Warriors were not a championship caliber team this year. They were trying to defend their title, and the team dynamic wasn't there. And Kerr, who's just what I love about Kerr is that he can admit he's got enough confidence. People that have real confidence can admit when they're wrong. Why? Because they're right a lot. And when you're right a lot, you can admit when you're wrong. And the team dynamic was off for the Warriors this year. And instead of pointing fingers at other people or dodging the blame, Kerr is taking the blame. He's putting the blame on his own shoulders. And he's trying to focus on what he can do better in this upcoming season to make things right again. And I just think that's what I love about Steve. You know, Steve's a great guy. I mean, he's a really, really great guy. And he's a better basketball coach. As good a guy as he is, he's an incredible coach. And I laughed and pushed back hard this year at the people that wanted to fire him. I have a buddy who runs a donut shop out here in Walnut Creek, and every time I talk to him, he's like, man, the Warriors got to fire Kerr. I'm like, what? They've had 4 parades. You want to fire this guy? But last year was not his year. And here's the quote from Kerr. He says, I will say that I feel like I failed last year in connecting the group. I've taken a lot of time this summer to think about last year, things I could have and should have done differently. I really believe that sometimes losing sort of forces you to reassess and reevaluate. And I'm excited about coming back next year with a renewed focus and energy and spirit from the entire group. And that starts with me, and I can't wait. I just love the fact that Kerr is taking ownership. You know, he's taking ownership. Now, let's get into it. What happened? Well, first of all, one of the problems was the team's chemistry. And you had Jordan Poole and Draymond Green get into a physical altercation at the beginning of the year, and then somebody internally leaked that out to the media, and so it became this national story and this defining narrative. And so that made this probably the most challenging and trying seasons of Steve's tenure here with the Golden State Warriors. But in my opinion, that's not the mistake that Steve made, was how he dealt with Poole and Green. The mistake that he made was you're one team. It doesn't matter if you have, all rookies and one veteran, if you have one rookie and all veterans. You have one team. And anytime you go about discussing your team in different components or separating your team, you're blowing it. All right? How many times did Kerr take to the podium or Warrior players, Draymond, Steph, Clay, others, take to the podium and somehow start discussing factions of the team? The older guys, the younger guys, Draymond at one point pushed back and was like, well, I don't know that the older guys are struggling. It's more the younger guys. Kerr should have just stamped that out right away and said that crap is not gonna fly. And it doesn't even matter if it's accurate or not. It's not about accuracy. It's about bringing the team along as a team. There's no if you're wherever you work, whatever you do, if somebody splits the workforce down the middle and says, well, there's the people up front versus the people in the back, that's not good. Well, it's the sales team versus the promotional team. That's not good. Well, it's this side versus that side. This side's doing a pretty good job. It's that side that's not. That's the quickest way to kill your chemistry. You win and lose as a team. And the Warriors didn't last year. They didn't win and lose as a team. The veterans blame the young guys. The young guys, I'm sure, probably steamed at getting blamed by the veterans, and the team never came together. And, then you had guys trying to ascend to leadership roles like Jordan Poole because his talent and the money that he was being paid said that he should. But then his standing within the team probably lost credibility with the way the whole fisticuffs came down between Draymond Green and himself. But that the issue wasn't the fight. There's all kinds of fights. The pro sports, people don't realize 99% of all of the fights that happen on a baseball team, a football team, a basketball team, the media never finds out about. Doesn't know anything about it. So we focused way too much on that fight and way too much on what it did to their psyche and all that. I'm sure they were fine. The difference was the trust was broken and it wasn't a team. Steve Kerr allowed the veterans to fracture the team by not taking accountability for the whole group and allowing the veterans to speak about different factions of the team. Well, it's not really the old guys and the championship guys that are pulling their weight. It's the younger guys. Well, what is that going to do? How's that going to unify anybody? The answer is it's not. It's going to lead to more division, more distrust, and guess what? The team never came together. Did they fulfill their potential? Well, I don't think they fell too far short. I thought they would have gone down to Denver either way, but they didn't even make it to Denver. They wound up losing to the Lakers. They never should have lost to the Lakers in the second round. They should have beat the Lakers. They should have gotten waxed by the Nuggets in the next round, but they never even got to that round because they really weren't united. But really what Steve has done is that he's and it's really not just Steve, too. It's an organizational thing. They've allowed themselves to empower their veterans to an unhealthy degree. It's one thing to listen to your players. I've heard, an old coach told me, hey, it's really, really important to hear your players. But just because you have to hear your players doesn't mean you listen to your players. You just have to hear them out. You have to give them a voice, but you don't have to listen to everything they say. They're on the team. You're the coach, or you're the general manager, or you're the owner. You're leading the team. And I realize basketball in the NBA especially, it's a players' league. So what? You don't listen to the players. You hear the players. If you listen to the players, you would have signed Avery Bradley instead of GP2. And that wasn't a good move. That wouldn't have been a good move. It would have cost you probably winning an NBA championship the year prior. So you listen to your players, and your players say, hey, we really like Avery Bradley. Okay, noted. Good to know that. Good to know where you guys sit. We actually prefer to go with Gary Payton. We're going to go with Gary Payton. So in that situation, the Warrior brass, Kerr, Myers, Lakeup, they heard their players out, thought about it, and decided that they were going to hear their players and respect their players, but not listen to their players. Well, this year they allowed their veterans to just basically not be accountable by blaming the younger players for the travails of the team. And that prevented the team from fully getting together as the year went on. One of the greatest strengths of Steve Kerr is he brings the entire team along. Why does he do it? Well, because he knows it's the key to winning basketball. He also is expert at it because he himself was a bench player. He himself was a player that played sparingly. And so he understands the value of keeping the team going and making sure that everybody's pulling in the right direction the entire 82 games. But the combination of not playing the younger players who desperately needed the time, leaning on the two-way players who were only slightly more developed but with far less upside, made it where they ended the year with not enough players. They just ran out of players. They decided to give a roster spot to Andre Iguodala, but Andre Iguodala couldn't play dead, and they never should have given him that roster spot. But they were so in love with their championship core that they allowed Iguodala to commandeer a roster spot when he was done. Should never have done that. They allowed, their Ty Jerome and Anthony Lamb to wind up playing significant minutes over Moses Moody. And Moses Moody didn't come along until the end of the year. And only because Moses Moody is a really, really solid guy did he persevere, and eventually he got minutes at the end of the year. And then they didn't allow themselves to forge the kind of togetherness and unity that they should have. And they didn't bring Jonathan Kuminga along in the right way either. And when it got time for the playoffs and Kuminga had a couple bad efforts, they banished him to the bench. So you couldn't use Moody. You couldn't use Kuminga for any real minutes. You could no longer use Ty Jerome. You couldn't use Anthony Lamb. Andre Iguodala was an NBA player in name only. You're talking about 5 guys that are useless on a 12-guy team, on a 13-guy team. The Warriors had 5 players on opening night that were 22 or younger. So they had a huge youth movement on their team. And instead of saying, hey, we're a team, veterans and young guys alike, they're like, the veterans had, they were allowed to do things on the floor and screw up, and they would get opportunities and again and again and again. Klay Thompson had some nightmarish games where he shot him out of it. Didn't hurt his standing. But if Kuminga did the exact same thing 3 nights later, he didn't play for a week. Moody should have been playing a lot more earlier this year. Kuminga should have been playing a lot more later in the year. They shouldn't have leaned on the two-way players. But the biggest mistake was allowing the veterans to take to the podium and night after night describe this team as 2 teams. Well, the young guys and the old guys, they weren't together. It wasn't like the team fell apart as the season went on. The team never got together, and that's on Kerr. And it was Kerr's worst year, and I just love the fact that instead of running from it, pretending it didn't happen, shifting the blame to somebody else, explaining it away with some weak excuse, Steve Kerr's a man. And he stands up and he says, you know what, I'm going to be accountable. I didn't do a good enough job. So all I'll say is, way to go, Steve. This is why Steve Kerr is a Hall of Famer. This is why Steve Kerr is a great coach. This is why Steve Kerr is an accountable human being. Because instead of blaming others and pointing the finger and shifting blame, he says, guess what? I had some time to reflect. I thought about it, and it's on me. Steve, it is on you, but I'll give you this. You're the bigger man for admitting it, and I hope there'll be good things ahead for you taking ownership of your failure. Way to go, Steve. Way to go, Steve. Absolutely have a great feeling about Steve. Always have, but even a greater feeling after he took ownership over the failure of this year, because he's right. It is on him. It wasn't like they were going to win the title if Steve had done something different, but they would have gone another round, and they would have been united, and they weren't. And it was because of mistakes that he made as the leader. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of The Krug Show. Thanks to all of you for supporting The Krug Show on YouTube.